Well, my name is Hans van Eck, and together with Mr. Tom van der Giessen, I'm representing Holland's Circular Hotspot, and I'm also working for the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. And first of all, I want to congratulate INCHAN with this wonderful event, and you can be very proud here in the Czech Republic that there is an institution that is taking up circular economy so enthusiastically, because that's very important to have enthusiasm and guts to bring the circular economy further together. So, you already saw what Eva also told, that in the year 2060 the use of raw materials will be doubled. Well, we have some more statements here, which means we and the Earth have some challenges to deal with. Also, I think the 29th of July, it was Earth Overshoot Day, which means that at the 29th of July, we already used everything the Earth is providing in 1 year's time. So, and we still have 5 months to go. And this date is shifting forward every year. So it's time for a system change both in economy and in sustainability. Well, that's why we also have been thinking about circular policy in the Netherlands. And we really need a circular economy perspective, because the Netherlands is for half of its area below sea level. We are an urban delta. If you take the western parts of the Netherlands, the city of The Hague, Amsterdam, Utrecht, and Rotterdam, it's about the size of the city of London. So we have a lot of challenges, because about 60–70% of all energy consumption, water use, resource uses is in urban areas. And finally, we are fully dependent on resources. So we developed a circular economy perspective with 3 goals, 3 focus areas. First of all, to look at redesign of products. So you need fewer resources. Second, to take conscious use of resources, so extend the lifetime of products. And finally, more and better use of waste as a material. And we also took 5 focus areas: plastics, consumer goods, manufacturing, building and construction, and biomass and food. Because these, if you take those 2 areas together, you have enough critical mass to make something out of the circular economy. So, well, you think nice to have a policy, but how can we organize things? So the Dutch government provided the country with a set of interventions. First of all, fostering legislation and regulations. As you already heard, there are a lot of barriers in legislation to make the circular economy initiatives possible. Like if you have waste and you want to process waste and send it as a new resource to another company, you have to realize end of waste status, and that's not very easy. So that's one example we have been dealing with in the Netherlands. Furthermore, we have intelligent market incentives, so you can think about research and also the development of new business models. And for the legislation part, I forgot one thing. We also can only manage to realize circular economy together with the businesses. So we give the businesses space to develop their own certification and standardization procedures. Then finance, we also offer all kinds of possibilities for subsidies and investment possibilities. knowledge and innovation. We have all kinds of acceleration platforms, both in the Netherlands as internationally, like Holland Circular Hotspot. And what is also on the part of knowledge and innovation, we have the so-called green deals. They also become a kind of an export product because they're also being used in all kinds of other countries and also in the EU. Which means you solve a problem together in a combination, public-private, with government companies and also sometimes knowledge institutions. And Ton will tell you something about that in the afternoon. And finally, last but not least, international cooperation. The resources market is an international market, so we are fully dependent on the international market. So if we want to achieve circular economy goals in the Netherlands, we have to go international. And it works both ways, of course, because that's in many countries the case. We also developed, for that reason, Holland Circular Hotspot, which is promoting circular economy worldwide. Then, so that's a bit of an idea of the policy, and well, I showed you the interventions. But how did we all start, and what's the situation now? Well, we started in 2016 with 350 representatives of knowledge institutions, the business community, governments, financial institutions. Labor unions, employers' organizations to sign a national agreement on circular economy, and that's how it works in the Netherlands. It's not top down. The government says what you will do, but the government is facilitating, and we have to do it together. We are in this together. And this also means it's a joint approach and not a top-down approach. As a result, in the years 2017 and 2018, 5 transition agendas were being developed, linked to those 5 subjects I mentioned before, the plastics, the construction, the biomass, and food and manufacturing. And, well, I've got the 5th one, but anyway. Also there were 5 separate working groups, again from the same groups, the government, the companies, etc., who developed their own agendas, and now they are working on it. And so now we are in a kind of a takeoff phase. So now we are focusing on innovation, because innovation is very important in the Netherlands. As I told you, we have been struggling with water for many ages, and that's already a reason to be very keen on innovation. And slowly we will accelerate, and then the next step will be a focus more on the behavior in society. They think, well, that's nice, but what's in it for us? Well, there's a lot in it for us. In the Netherlands, TNO, it's a world-famous research institute, has calculated the following results. We have savings on raw materials. We have less usage of raw materials, less land and water use, more work, and also especially linked to people with a distance to the labor market. And also, last but not least, if you look at the whole climate discussion lately, less emissions of CO2. Well, I already mentioned green deals. Well, this is one example, and you see one familiar face on the photo. It's very small, of course, but Mr. Ton van der Giessen is also there. This is an example how you can work together with several countries and several organizations to solve legal barriers, regulatory barriers, and support the markets. And this was about, I think, about waste sources, to get waste into a source of material for new products. As a matter of fact, the products Mr. van der Giessen is making is granulate from plastic being enriched and it also ends up in Philips vacuum cleaners, for example. But I won't tell too much, because otherwise I will leave you some time to tell your story, of course. And we have many examples. We also have circular festivals. We also have a Green Deal on circular procurement, because that's also an important incentive governments can use, because procurement is about 14 to 20% of the GDP worldwide. So you have the possibility as a government to steer actually to have circular procurement instead of normal procurement. Then Holland Circular Hotspot. What I already said, it's very important that we link companies, knowledge institutions, and also governments together, not only in the Netherlands, but just worldwide. It would be fantastic if you could somehow have a worldwide, or at least as a start, a European network of circular hotspots, so they can all exchange their best practices. Resources, by example, being offered here in the Czech Republic could be used in the port of Rotterdam, and products being offered there could be used in the Slovak Republic, for example. So you can have some interaction of offer and demand in circular products. And what we do is to support and promote the export products. We also have a brochure and also a website with loads of best practices, and that's also what I really would ask you to do. Also share your best practices worldwide, because we all need it. We all need each other's best practices to make circular economy a success in the world. Well, then some conclusions. I will, because I have 2 minutes left, I will not mention all of them. But first of all, good waste management, recycling is a good first step to a circular economy. And also understanding the barriers to circularity and start addressing and removing them is an important one, because you have to do it as a business, but you also should be able to do it as a business. And also a platform to provide best practices is also very important, and I hope we will sign this afternoon the birth of a new European hotspot, the Czech Circular Hotspot. And finally, last of not least, I think it's nice to have secondary materials, but they also should comply with the right quality standards, so companies can actually use them. Thank you very, very much, and I'll give the floor back.
Thank you, Hans, very much. Please take your seat to the right of Eva. And I will now invite Ton van Werder, Giessen, to join us for the discussion, which will wrap up this morning, this first kickoff hotspot. And I'm actually very, very happy that with the setup of this panel, because we have a bird's eye view sort of researcher analyst looking at the issues of circular economy from the OECD perspective, and which was really glad that you actually gave us some sort of insight into the European and what I would call some sort of a first world problems compared to the rest of the world. And no pun intended, but we'll get to that. Then we got the example of like the how policy is made in the Netherlands, and Ton straddles both. Ton is both involved in sort of drafting and creating and helping creating policies, but also he's an entrepreneur. He runs a plastics recycling company. So I will take the opportunity to actually ask him 2 questions. Originally, I meant that to be only one, but Eva's presentation gave me another idea. Can the whole world's plastics be fully recycled? That's the question number 1. And the question number 2, even if we do that, because we can all see all these horrific pictures of plastics in the Pacific, but as Eva showed us in her presentation, the much bigger problem in sort of material waste, so to speak, or not being reused again is actually construction waste. So please tell us something about plastics and how it sort of stacks against that much bigger problem which Eva sort of completely described this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, plastics, everybody is thinking about it, telling about it. It is mostly an issue on every birthday party. What are you doing with that material? Is it possible to recycle all the plastics all over the world? Wow, that's a big challenge, but it has to be our goal, I think. Because when it's not our goal, we are losing too much of our chances. And it will not be easy, because there are two items. 1/3 we are losing now at this moment in nature, on land and in the sea and oceans. For example, in the oceans, 8 million tons of plastics are added to every year. And on the other hand, between now and 2050, we think the demand on plastics will triple because of the growing population on the world and also because of the growth of prosperity. So it is a big challenge, but I think it's doable.
So what about the construction waste? How does it sort of stack up against plastics? I mean, how do you see it?
I think it's more easy.
Do you see it as a problem?
It's more easy. For example, in the Netherlands, we recycle at this moment around 8% of all the plastics, but 95% of all the construction and building waste. Because it's more heavy, it's easier to collect, you have a quicker business model out of it, and that makes it, I think, more easy than the recycling of all the plastics.
I see, Eva, you want to sort of chip in, react to that?
Yeah, I just would like to ask, because I think that 95% is really an impressive number, but is this what is recycled, or is this actually what's getting reused? Because I know one of the problems, and I know the Netherlands is really at the very forefront of it, but many other European countries are lagging behind with the regulation that you can reuse actually the recycled concrete for building the bridges, that the stability is there. I know that there is a lot of questioning around relabeling it from waste to actually input, and to that related, basically people who would want to be using it, there's not enough regulatory clarity whether they are allowed to do so. So rather than having the hassle, they don't do it. What is your Dutch experience?
95% is recycled. Is it recycled in new building materials? No, not all. It's recycled, but also used in other kinds of activities. Because that's the business model right now. And at the moment we can have a better business model to bring it up to a higher level. It will be, of course, an extra challenge. But, for example, concrete is used in new concrete, and we are also now having the first installations to get the cement out of the old concrete and use it again, because a lot of it is not used in the first time.
I will take the opportunity of actually ask some of the questions that came from the audience, and I'll start from the one at the bottom. Hans, can you... Now I lost the question, but anyway, the question was, if I remember it correctly, can you give some sort of a Dutch example that is most worthy to follow in the Czech Republic in terms of putting circular economy in work? In your experience, what would be the sort of the first most important thing to start besides starting the circular hotspot?
Well, I would start with just the simple things. Just one wonderful example, maybe it's not the most huge one in impact, but there's a company called Rotterdam. They are actually growing mushrooms on the remains of coffee. It's in the city of Rotterdam they started, and they have connections with all kind of cafes and restaurants. They get the coffee leftovers from them, grow the mushrooms, and they give them the mushrooms in return. A very simple example, and this concept is well, they also export the concept as for free. It's right to copy and no copyright, and that's also one of the that's the second nice part of it. I think you have to share your examples, so you can also maybe there is already comparable company on these mushrooms also active here. I don't know, but they have exported this concept for free all over the world until Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm. So that's probably a question for all of you. And what do you think is the most important thing and the first thing the Czech government should do in terms, if it really indeed wants to sort of put circular economy principles into work?
Make waste, when you think about the waste part in circular economy, put a tax on landfilling, make it more expensive. Then business models are going to work automatically. Put a landfill ban for burnable waste, for example. And don't build too much waste-to-energy plants, because what you burn today, you can't recycle tomorrow. You need them in the transition, but the end goal must be no waste-to-energy plant anymore.
So if I were to actually even distill it further, it's just forget about landfills. Is that the way to go?
That must be the end goal, because then you are recycling the maximum. Are you reaching that in the next coming 10 years? No. Mm-hmm. Because the transition needs more time. But when there is a landfill ban or for recyclables, for example, or it is more expensive by putting every year a higher tax on it. For example, in the UK, they started with £15 per ton, and now it's 85. And in the meantime, the recycling industry is taking his challenges.
Mm-hmm. Eva, from your OECD perspective, where does Czech Republic stand compared to the Netherlands when it comes to landfills?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure the Dutch are very much leading the landfill the landfilling bans, and the Czech Republic is lagging fairly much behind. I don't know whether anybody knows the number by ahead, but I know in Czech Republic you have this thing around recycling or not landfilling, which is not the actual number that shows how much is recycled. It's just a number that's being collected. But what I wanted to say is maybe a more systematic, helicoptering back to the previous question, maybe a more systematic approach to the whole thing would be the Czech government, and not really just the Czech government, but every country really, to have a very systematic approach to understand where the economy is going, what is the current policy baseline, and then talking to the stakeholders and listening to what the public sector has to say, what the private sector has to say, what the NGOs and the civil society have to say, where do they feel, which sectors are the most important, and then try to set some kind of a prioritization exercise. These are the sectors we want to look at, these are the parts of the value chains we want to look at, and then within each try to devise a mix of policies. And I think that's very important, not only regulation, but it should be also mixed together with financial instruments or market incentives. There should be some voluntary approaches to it, and there should be also education and knowledge creation and all that together in order to kick off a circular economy in the Czech Republic.
And you mentioned in your presentation that the OECD has been asked to comment on the policies that the Czech Ministry of Environment is creating. I mean, have you been involved in that, or are you somehow aware of that? How do you look at the sort of attitude of Czech government officials towards circular economy principles?
All right.
Or you're not allowed to comment on that, so, you know.
No, so the way you formulated it, I'll probably not answer it for understandable reasons. I would like to flag that this Friday we have the project launch at the Ministry of Environment, and we know that there will be some stakeholders, and basically everybody from the working group has been invited to participate. So we are trying all together to make it a very participative process. So if some of you are sitting here, then please do come and voice your opinions in the discussion with our director and the Deputy Minister of the Environment. For the rest, our work is going to be about informing the strategy It's basically trying to help developing some key elements for this strategy in terms of what could be the priorities, how to approach these priorities with some short-term measures so that they work out in the long term.
Hans, can you sort of elaborate on that? Because what I'm actually driving at is, and correct me if I don't remember it correctly from your presentation, but you said that in 2016 you had some sort of a national agreement in the Netherlands on how we're going to go forward. Is this sort of what Eva has just described, that's actually starting with this meeting this week at the Czech Ministry of Environment, is this a sort of like the very initial stage of what you did 3 years ago, or is it something even earlier? In other words, where does the Czech Republic stand vis-à-vis the Netherlands on like having this sort of a national consensus on the circular economy?
What I understood is that the Czech Republic is now working on the circular policy, so that's good news. But what I would like to stress, that's very important that you have focus, that you don't take everything, because there are so many subjects you can deal with. So what we did is to take 5 areas and focus on that. So that's one thing. And also do it bottom up, do it together, because you need the commitment of the companies, of the knowledge institution, and you need them to have a successful circular economy. Mm-hmm. And also the labor unions, and also the employers' organizations, NGOs, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So those kind of things I would like to add to that. If you could also follow that approach, and it's still not easy, but I think it will, in the end, it will work. Mm-hmm. And in the Netherlands, well, we have the goal of a fully circular economy by 2050 and half reduction of the material use in 2030. There will be a hell of a job, but I think we can get pretty far if we do it together.
There's one question which in Czech, we'll translate now, and it's kind of alluding to one of your slides about where the circular economy in the Netherlands stands as a share of the whole economy. So can you sort of like repeat it, maybe put it in more sort of a percentage description in terms of what's the share of the circular economy in the Netherlands at the moment?
The share of the, I must say, I don't know exactly. Yeah. Tom, do you maybe know?
Tom, for your company, it's 100%, so so it's easy.
But that's only a little part of the total economical situation, lucky we are. When we look, I think the total revenue at this moment is around €500 million a year. Mm-hmm. There are working around 4,000 people in that business, mm-hmm. and it's growing rapidly.
And where was it in 2016? Was it like zero?
No. For sure, it was not zero. I think it has grown in the last 3 years with 1/3, mm-hmm. and we started already in 2000 mm-hmm. in this way of thinking, and that was because of landfill ban and landfill tax.
So we're really back to the very basics regulation, and the regulation should be about like, okay, not behaving circularly will cost you a lot. So if you do behave circularly, so to speak, you can actually benefit from it and not only save money, but you can also probably make money.
No, sure. Also, it's also a political item. I think there's no political party in the Netherlands anymore that is not supporting a circular economy, which already says that it's really an important subject, and also. I think it's important for SMEs, but also for the multinationals. There's still a lot of greenwashing going around, of course. But I was 2 years ago in Bulgaria on a meeting, and then one of the directors of ArcelorMittal, the biggest steel and mining company in the world, said there is no plan B. If we don't act. We can shut off our business because the resources will become so expensive that we have no proper business models anymore. And that's one example I think I always like to share, because that's not small company saying this.
There's one more question from the audience, which I would like all of you, if you want to input, to have your input, and it's how how do you account for energy use when you're looking at like the circular economy? I mean, what's the weighting of like the materials inputs and materials recycling relative to the energy that's actually used for it? I mean, maybe that question is sort of alluding to the fact that, okay, we may be recycling, reusing some of the stuff, but the energy that we use is actually making the net sort of result negative. How do you actually account for that?
For example, in plastics, mechanical recycling, you are saving a lot of CO2, unless you also need energy to recycle it. But that says something about the production of primary raw material. Before it is from Saudi Arabia, from oil, a product in your house, a lot of CO2 is also part of that production process. When you go to chemical recycling, I think it's also in the future a part of the plastic recycling industry. You need much more energy. Mm-hmm. And then you have a balance, depending on how you can produce your energy. Is it renewable energy or is it energy made of brown coal? Then you have a total other balance, of course. Mm-hmm. So both items, recycling of raw materials, but on the other hand, the production of renewable energy has to grow together to have at the end both goals at the same balance.
Are there any standards for that sort of an issue, balancing out the energy needs versus the actual end product of the circular economy from like the researcher's point of view or the OECD level?
Yes. So
do you have any benchmarks or?
I'm afraid that this would be a very boring macroeconomic type of an analysis answer to this. So within our models, we definitely do reflect the entire economy and do reflect the material flows and the energy flows as well. As the colleague has said correctly, it has very much to do with how energy efficient the processes are and what kind of energy is used for those. So whether this is fossil fuel driven or whether it's renewable energy, and all that goes into the assumption which then drives the model. Mm-hmm. Not sure the audience would be really interested in the practicalities of plugging the numbers into the model.
But anyone who's interested can actually grab you during the sort of networking at the end,
yes,
or during the lunchtime?
I will try to do so. So I'm not a modeler myself. I'm a policy analyst person, but very happy to also point you to the colleagues who actually do the nitty-gritties of the modeling and then to the reports which we have online.
Excellent. I have to get to that because that question has been there for quite a long time, and it's about plastics, and it's in English. So is the bioplastics the way to go?
I'm happy that you asked me that question. Because make a difference between bio-based and biodegradable. Mostly they are in one name, but that are two totally different types of plastic. And bio-based, I think it's a very beautiful product. It has to close the gap because of the triple of the reuse of the demand of plastics in the coming 30 years. You can't recycle what is not thrown away or doesn't exist. You need a lot of extra primary raw material. So to bridge that gap, it can be partly based also on bioplastics. Biodegradable, yeah, I think we have to look first to the countries where it's used, but in Europe, let's focus on Europe, I don't believe in biodegradable. Because when biodegradable is part of what's coming in on our location, as a plastic recycling company, it's waste, it's residue, it's going to incineration. When it is in a composting plant in the Netherlands, we are composting in 2 weeks. But that material needs a much longer period. So at the end, it is sieved out at the compost, and it's going as a residue also to the incinerator. When it's coming into nature, then we think that it is a degradable product. But you need good circumstances to let that process run. When it comes into water, it doesn't degrade because there is no temperature, there is no sunlight. I don't believe biodegradable is a solution. Maybe when you have flower pots and you put them into the ground and then after a few years they are gone. but don't use it for food packaging or something like that. I think that's not the goal in our future.
So the way to go on bioplastics is bio-based.
Bio-based.
Okay, I have to remember that. There's a very, very good question from someone from the audience, and again, it's great to have representatives of the Netherlands, and it's about how do you go from the use of landfills and as a share of like managing the waste in the country from 49%, where the Czech Republic apparently is now, according to that question, to about 1% where like the very advanced European countries are. How long does it take to get there? In other words, to actually pretty much eliminate landfills. How long did it take Holland to get where you are guys now?
20 years.
Okay.
From 65 to 3.
And when was the first real tax, or what was the first step in 65?
2020, in 2000, put a tax on landfill of 100 euros a ton.
Mm-hmm. And where's the tax now?
Now there is no...
there's complete ban.
There is a ban, yeah. Then at the end there is a ban, but start with a tax. And then you see, when you tax the landfill, that sounds not nice, because you have a higher cost in the beginning. But it gives the market the opportunity to start up new business. A lot of that waste, what is going to landfill, is mostly building and demolition waste in tonnages. And that's easy to recycle. That costs much less than the 100 euros. And when you start at a certain moment, the price will go down again. And the other price, for sure, when also the effects of the future environmental impact will be calculated on the price of raw materials, then it is an advantage to have lower costs. But start first with a high landfill tax, and then I think you can do it in half of the time, 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, and we also started composting. So for the biodegradable part, which is very successful, and also yeasting, I think, because that's also a big part of landfill originally, what went to the landfill. And the whole process of waste management has a history of 150 years. But I totally agree. The last 20, 30 years, that's when the things really were happening, like we see now.
I know none of you is a politician, but as a policymaker, Hans, I mean, how was it 20 years ago, you know, sort of viewed by just the voters, by general population, that because, you know, when that tax was put in place, obviously it must have actually increased the cost of how people pay for their sort of regular waste bins from their homes, you know, waste collection. I mean, that must have sort of increased typical average household monthly bills. So how did people take it 20 years ago, and how has it developed since then? I mean, the attitude of ordinary Dutch people.
Yeah, well, you still have people that don't like the idea, but I think it went pretty well. I don't think there were really problems. What I remember myself from those times, I was quite happy that because if you offer good facilities to the people to collect the waste, etc., then it's not a problem at all. But maybe you can add to that.
A household has a maximum of 1 ton a year on waste. Mostly when you already put your glass and your paper separate, it's reducing to 600 kilograms. So putting a landfill tax of 100 euro a ton is 60 euros a year. It's 5 euros a month, it's 1 euro a week. Parking your car when you are going for shopping is more expensive. So what is the amount? Of course, it's not political, it's not nice, but it is doable. Not a problem, I think. It's communication around it.
I promised that at the very beginning. We are approaching our time limit, and I still have one more question, which I'm pretty sure is more on Eva, but I would really invite all of you to your input. I mean, we're really talking about what I describe as first world problems. Let's face it. I mean, if we do really well in Europe, is it going to really make some impact on the rest of the world? Because I'm alluding to the chart that you give breakdown to Asian countries, and there are some arguments, okay, if we're going to force that part of the world do what we can do and what we are doing in Europe, I mean, we may be forcing those people to go back to like one bowl of rice a day, you know, existence that they sort of emerged from maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago. What's your view on that? You know, is it really doable globally?
Thanks a lot. So this is not necessarily going to be an OECD view, it's going to be a view of me as a researcher. I also worked on circular economy in China, so do have some insight in circular economy in emerging countries, and I can tell you that whether it's China or it's South Africa or recently some of the other BRIC countries, there are efforts to set up circular economy just as strategies, so implementing it on the level of companies. Lots of these are as bottom-up initiatives rather than here. We have in Europe, a lot of it is top-down or even from the European level down to the national ones. Of course, there's a lot of contradiction around why should those countries, when we industrialized in a dirty way, why should we say those countries shouldn't do the same? Of course, you see how the construction is peaking or will be peaking soon in China in terms of their incredible consumptions of cement and all the materials that are related. But the fact is that circular economy can be a model of development which would help leapfrog from this very dirty path of development to something a lot cleaner. It could also be an answer to a lot of poverty. If you see what China has been doing, they have been lifting an incredible amount of people up to the middle class, and circular economy is one way to give them, in a way, if you want, notionally access to some of the services that they could, or some of the people not access through buying or purchasing the products, like purchasing the cars. Instead, in China, they have massive uses and also employment because of the shared mobility, for example. So I do not necessarily think that circular economy would hamper the development. To the opposite, it would help to mainstream some of the bottom-up innovation of the technologies, would give access to people to new skills, new jobs, and would help to employ also idle resources. So a grandma somewhere in Prague, okay, it's not a developing country, but it's just an example to show that she could rent some of her rooms and get additional income, and this is the same thing that could happen in some of the developing countries, but maybe the colleagues have a different view.
No, I totally agree with you. If you, for example, look at Africa, the biggest population growth will be in Africa. The biggest cities in the future will be in Africa. Not anymore Mexico City or whatever, but Africa. There's a huge young population that needs employment. Circular economy offers a lot of populations. Also huge landfills, because of this expanding population, are filling up far too fast. So also circular economy can be a way of leapfrogging the incineration plants for a part, which also are not always affordable in those countries, and also offer job opportunities. And there's also a social responsibility from the Western world, I think, because it's also about inclusiveness, circular economy. And like I was in Accra in May this year, and was the biggest e-waste dump in the world. And so it's also work for those people. They are decomposing all kinds of telephones, mobile phones, but also televisions. Just to connect on the television, because there's a copper element where they can get money out. But what's coming out of this television is, of course, not good for them. And it's all because we are sending those ships loads with e-waste to those countries. So and now there is a Dutch company that is taking back telephones from Ghana again, and also other African countries. So the people there get money to collect the phones, and they ship it back to the Netherlands, and they're being decomposed also on a responsible manner. Like what I understood is distracting gold from a mobile phone is cheaper than to distract it from the earth. So that's also an example how you can have a win-win creation, and also, it's also about Western responsibility. Yeah.
I would take this opportunity, unless Ton, you want to add something to...
I think also in the States they get another president at the end.
Okay. So I would like to thank all of you, the panelists, for this incredible discussion.